And actually, I would argue the biggest reason why companies fail is not because they run out of money, it's because the founders are misaligned. And so having hard conversations up front to understand what are you expected to deliver over the next year, I think is really important. If you don't have those hard conversations, then there ends up being misalignment.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Daniel, for taking time out of your very busy schedule. It's good to have you here. I was reflecting, but I first met Daniel about 5 years ago. I think we were both in our bedrooms. I was trying to work out how video conferencing worked. And it feels like things have come on exponentially since then. So it's really interesting to hear from someone who's been at the forefront of a lot of this stuff over the years. And I think the first question for you, Daniel, really is just tell everyone a little bit about your story, where you've come from and where you've got to today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I've been involved in AI for about 27 years. My undergraduate was in AI at UCL, just down the road. There's 2 people on my course. Things have changed a lot since then. My master's was in AI, PhD, postdocs. I ran a master's program in applied AI for 5 years at UCL. So I had hundreds of students going out there applying these technologies. And I'm now entrepreneur in residence at UCL, so I help them spin out deep tech companies. And I'm on the board of a number of other academic institutes, helping them understand how to commercialize their IP. For my sins, I started a company 20 years ago, probably now, from my PhD, that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world, like Tesco and PwC. I never took any capital actually into that company because I didn't like how VC capital worked. We can talk about it later on if you want. But I sold that company. We had about 120 deep AI experts to WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, despite knowing nothing about marketing. And I still like to claim I know nothing about marketing because it allows me to ask dumb questions. But I now run AI across WPP, so about 120,000 people. And WPP give me a huge amount of rope. They're really generous. So I've actually spun out a few companies from WPP. One of them is to solve machine consciousness. So if we want to go very deep today, we can go very deep. Yep.
Thank you very much. No, that's right. So I guess the next question is, how have you found the difference from running your own small company to living in the corporate world in WPP?
There's the honest answer and there's a political correct. So I think like most entrepreneurs, I'm completely unemployable. And I think that the reality is that WPP probably knows that I'm completely unemployable. So they give me a lot of rope. So I think they really value me. In fact, I just came out of a meeting with the CEO, Cindy, who said that she values me. I thought I might come out without a job, but anyway, she does value me, which is great. And I think because I add value in the organization and because I still continue to run Satalia, my original company, which is about 400 deep AI experts, and she understands deeply the importance of AI and how it's going to transform that industry. And they also deeply appreciate the need to have foundational knowledge, right? I know AI happened for most people 3 years ago, and a lot of people have rebranded themselves as AI experts, and that's perfectly natural. But if you want to build differentiated AI solutions, you need to have differentiated talent, and I think that they really deeply understand and appreciate that. So they give me a lot of freedom. And there are, of course, many challenges working with large organizations, the bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff. But I think if you can show and add value, then with the right culture, the right organizations, that you can thrive. And I think it's been one of the most successful acquisitions in their recent time. And partly it's because obviously AI did happen, and that is completely transforming that industry. But that organization is very entrepreneurial, and the way that we structured the deal, and I'm happy to go into details if you want. But it was I was on an earn-out, and most people who I know who have been on earnouts, they typically say earnouts don't go very well because you're sort of dependent upon them to help you generate the revenues or the targets to be able to achieve your earnout, and it doesn't end well. But that earnout was actually a great mechanism for me to prove the value that we could create and to hit the targets. And again, it's been an amazing journey, and I'm loyal to WPP and continue to engage in helping them transform their industry.
And if you look back to pre the acquisition and perhaps quite a bit before then, what are your sort of key tips, bits of advice for people who are looking to build and scale their businesses up, perhaps to get the interest of a business like WPP or to scale or have any other sort of exit?
Yeah, so Satalia is really I think, arguably a very unique organization. So 20 years ago, I had this idea called AI as a service. And I think it's still early now, 20 years later. But the idea is that the businesses have problems where the algorithms can be used to solve those problems. And there are incredible algorithms that are being developed in academia that never reach the light of day. So the question was, could you create a conduit between problems that exist in industry and then these amazing innovations that sit in academia? So essentially, you give us your problem and we use AI to understand what the right AIs are to solve your problem. And really, people couldn't get their head around that. So Satalia originally started as being a services company backed by this clever technology that nobody understood. And we started to build a reputation of being able to solve very hard problems, whether it be machine learning problems or optimization problems. One of our first biggest clients was actually Tesco. I remember what happened actually with Tesco is that we went through a long kind of dating phase, and they wanted to come and see our office. And we didn't have an office. So I phoned my mate up who ran like an incubator, and I said, can we pretend that we've got an office? And I phoned loads of my other mates to say, can you come and pretend that you work for us? so when Tesco came, they thought we knew what we were doing. It turned out we did really know what we were doing, and that ended up giving us the revenues to be able to go and grow the business. But what Satalia was trying to do was be the most innovative organization that we can be, in the sense that how do you organize a group of very smart people to be able to build innovations that help people differentiate their supply chain? So Tesco had a problem in their supply chain, which is last mile delivery. We had no idea how to solve this problem. There's tons of solutions on the market that have been around for 20 years that have had millions of dollars of investment. And the question was, can you build something that will differentiate us from our competitors? And we said yes. We don't know how, but we said yes. And but because of our kind of links to academia and our pedigree in understanding AI and optimization and these algorithms, they trusted us to go and do that. And it was been an overwhelming success. And the way that I constructed Satalia was to be both. What tends to happen is that when you start a company, you end up being like a services company or a product company, and you structure your organization, your processes and your hierarchies around those types of offerings. And what happens if you get big enough, fortunately, you end up having pressure to diversify your revenue. So you end up trying to do product if you're a services company, you end up trying to do services if you're a product company. And of course, you're not set up to be able to deliver both those things. But I knew very, very early on at the beginning, I wanted to create an organizational structure that allowed us to deliver any innovation, whether it be an open source, a consultancy solution, a product, a platform. How do you organize a company in a way to allow you to be really good at delivering these types of things? And so what happened over the years was that we built, we solved problems for companies like Tesco and PwC. We then started to productize them. So actually we built a last mile delivery solution off the back of building that for Tesco, which actually a few weeks ago you probably saw, we may not have saw, but we now provide that solution for Waitrose. So we're delivering all of your deliveries for if you use Waitrose. So we got to the point where we did consultancy. We've got these amazing products around workforce optimization, last mile delivery. And we knew that if we wanted to really scale these products, we had to get investment. As a consultant, you can kind of eat what you kill. But if you want to build and scale software, you need obviously investment to go and do that. And so we went to market to try to get investment into these vertical solutions. And of course, VCs didn't understand us at all. It's like, what are you a last mile delivery company? Are you an AI company? What are you? So at the time, WPP had an AI hole, not an AA hole, but an AI hole. And I'd been working with WPP on a few projects, and they said, look, we really think that you would thrive in this organization. And the fact is that there were 5 reasons for the acquisition, 5 synergies. And we were approached by Accenture and other people and that kind of stuff. And if I'm honest, those conversations left me cold. But the 5 reasons to join WPP, one is that we built these assets that we could then sell as part of an augmented marketing solution. So if you've got a website that there is a retail website, we can now do last mile delivery. The second is I'm really passionate about workforce. How do you allocate workforce in dynamic, agile, liquid ways? And so WPP have 120,000 people that you can now have sort of that control over. The third is they've got a very exciting supply chain that we were there to try and differentiate. The fourth is they touch pretty much every brand in the world, so we can go and start delivering AI solutions for them. And I think I was given the AI Chief AI Officer title before again AI happened, and that's given me a platform to really promote a lot of the things I talk about in terms of AI safety and its impact on society. So that was the reason for the acquisition. Those five synergies, and it's been amazing.
And if you look back, are there some things that you know now that you wish you'd known back then that might have made that journey easier?
I mean, how many entrepreneurs in the business, there are so many things, so many mistakes we make. In academia, I see companies start, and what typically happens is founders decide to split the equity 50-50 or a third, whatever, and then they don't have any expectations in terms of what they expect to deliver over the next year, so they fall out. And actually, I would argue the biggest reason why companies fail is not because they've run out of money, it's because the founders are misaligned. And so having hard conversations up front to understand what are you expected to deliver over the next year, I think is really important. If you don't have those hard conversations, then there ends up being misalignment. There were so many mistakes I've made over the years. I mean, I wrote a blog article listing 16 things that you won't learn from ChatGPT about entrepreneurship, and I'm very happy to kind of share that. But networking, I know that networking is a cliche. I was very fortunate to be paid by the British government, so your tax money, to go and live in the US for 6 months to learn about how they take technology from Stanford and Harvard and MIT and Berkeley. And the goal was to send 30 entrepreneurs over to the US to learn about how they scale technology companies, and then to bring that knowledge back to the UK. And I ended up living in Silicon Valley for 2 years. But one of the things I recognized was that very quickly the sort of attitude in Silicon Valley is they network very well. I know it sounds like a cliche, but in the UK, if you go to an event like this historically 10 years ago, you would tell people about your business, they'll nod and smile and they'll say, that's very nice. If you go to an event in the US, they'll want to introduce you to their network. They want to kind of say, look, I'll make you these introductions, and very, very quickly you saturate that network. And by the way, I have a pet theory that it stems from that dating culture. So in the US, you used to be able to date lots of people at the same time, and it was only when you're kissing somebody that you're not allowed to then kiss. It's not until you have a conversation with them you're going to steady that but in the UK, if you're kissing somebody, you're not allowed to kiss anybody else. And so in the UK, we're very careful about how we form relationships, because if those relationships don't work out, then we're seen as being dysfunctional. Whereas in America, it's okay for relationships to start and fail. So I think we're a lot more cautious about how we are free with our network. So networking is been actually, I think, is the lubricant of innovation. I wish I'd done that a lot more early on. So well done for coming today, and ask people, to make introductions to 3 people that they know. It'll be uncomfortable, but ask people to do that. But I can list, we'll keep it here for hours if you want.
And what would you say was your number 2 after networking?
Well, the first, if you was to hold a gun to my head and say, what's the one piece of advice you would give to somebody, then just like a genie, if a genie offers you one wish, what do you wish for? More wishes, exactly. So it's the same for advice. I think that if the one piece of advice I would give you is surround yourself by people who know what they're doing. And I'm very fortunate that Chris has been looking after me for the past 4 years. But there are people, as you know, that have been through these journeys. Create an advisory board. Surround yourself with people that really do know what they're doing, and particularly in the world of AI, because there's so much nonsense, scaremongery, misinformation. I would feel weird about how to navigate my companies now in this world. In fact, I did start now 2 new companies, and Chris keeps saying, stop starting companies. But I just started 2 new companies. And I have no idea about how they're going to play out in this world of AI. So get as much advice as you can.
And in relation to the UK tech scene, so what do we do that better than the Americans? And what's the kind of future in the UK? Because the American scene is obviously the one that everyone knows about, who's not close to it. So what's exciting and positive to look forward to for the UK?
I would usually defer that question to Chris. So, but I guess one of the other things that's different between the UK and the US is, look, 15 years ago, even when I was trying to raise capital, you would typically get capital from people that have made money in finance. like hedge funds and banking and things like that. And if I'm really honest, those people don't know about entrepreneurship. Whereas in the US, they've had 3 generations of academics go out, start companies, make a load of money, go back into academia, invest in the next generation, and they're not just bringing money, they're bringing the know-how of how to build and scale solutions. And so I'd like to think that we are now just creating that first generation of entrepreneurs that have made at least enough money to invest in the next generation. So to answer your question, I don't really know about the tax incentives and things like that, but I think that what we need is a generation of entrepreneurs, hopefully people like you, that will do well in terms of making some money and then invest in the next generation of entrepreneurs. I think that that's really the trajectory that we need to go into. There's this rhetoric which is it's really hard to scale in the UK and Europe, and the answer is it is hard to scale in Europe because you have to understand how to sell to different jurisdictions, navigate their HR laws. It's easier to scale in places like America and China. They've got big markets you can scale into very, very quickly. And the problem is that, we don't see a lot of growth capital here because we don't see companies. It's not easy to grow, but I think that over the next 5 years, as we start to create new companies that do scale and that do make some money, then I think that we'll see more growth capital coming in as well. So there'll be you investing in companies, getting them off the ground, and then hopefully there's sort of hundreds of millions of dollars that then needs to get put in to be able to scale them to make them global businesses.
And with the technology advancing so quickly, how can people who are building their businesses stay ahead? What are the things that they need to watch out for? How can they remain relevant in a world that's moving so fast?
Well, I can talk about AI, but so AI is a little bit like an intoxicated graduate at the moment. That it is getting smarter. So it's going from being an intoxicated graduate to like a master's level where it can do rudimentary reasoning. In the next year, maybe we'll have a PhD level where it can do crude science. In the next few years, we'll have a postdoc level that can apply kind of complex scientific apparatus solving very complex problems. And it's predicted by the end of this decade, we're going to have a professor in our pocket. So something can not only solve very hard problems, but can ask questions that humanity has never asked. And that's one definition of AI. So I think it's really important to build, not for the now, but build for that trajectory. Because what you don't want to do is necessarily build something now that in 6 months' time is going to be redundant. And so understanding that trajectory is important. Understanding also that there are new paradigms. I know that large language models are really smart and they're exciting, but your brain does not need a nuclear power station to run. Your brain operates on the power of a light bulb. My PhD 22 years ago was trying to model bumblebee brains. Bumblebees have 1 million brain cells. Their brains can fit on a never needle. They do amazing things just like human beings. They talk to each other. They navigate 3D worlds and solve problems. They don't handle Windows very well, but ultimately they're smart creatures. And it's my favorite joke, by the way. The point is that large language models are horrendously engine efficient. They require tons of data to learn. They learn very slowly. And there are many innovations that are actually coming out of academia called neuromorphics, which are essentially modeled how our brain works. And these are going to completely change the paradigm in terms of how AI operates. So I think 2 things just to mention. One is, for me, certainly in a large organization, the best strategy to allow you to innovate is 3 things. One is enable people to innovate at the edge. So give your employees access to these tools to be able to build and use them to make their jobs better and more efficient. Have somehow, if you can, a centralized deep AI capability. And if you can't, then work with a third party that can help bring in that talent that can differentiate your business. And the third is work with partners, third-party vendors that can bring in tools, Workday or whatever, ServiceNow, that can solve a lot of the productivity problems. A lot of excitement around productivity. How can we use AI to be more productive? I think the reality is that stuff can be solved by a third party at a fraction of the cost. You need to be solving problems across your supply chain that differentiate you from your competitors. And so that requires people to innovate, but it also requires you to have access to a deep AI capability. And so, first of all, by the way, if you want to attract AI talent, then I think you need to have a strong purpose. I think one of the differentiators that you have as a startup is to have a strong purpose. And one of the reasons why we're trying to solve machine consciousness is because it will also, that North Star allows us to attract talent. The other 3 things just to mention is that the other thing that differentiates a company in the world of AI, one is data. It's not the technology that's a differentiator, unless you're building foundational technology. It's data. If you've got data that contains more useful insights than your competitors, then you have an advantage. If you don't have data that contains differentiation, then try and get it or you're going to have to come up with a business model, maybe open source, that is differentiated. And the second is AI talent, and you will get some way with using people that have rebranded themselves as AI experts over the past 3 years. But again, if you want to build differentiated solutions, you need to have differentiated talent. I don't want to kind of poo-poo these companies that are able to, after 3 months, be generating £100 million ARR, but I think that those revenues are actually fragile. If it only takes 3 months to build a solution that's generating £100 million ARR, it might take somebody less time to take your revenues. So I'm a little bit worried about the ability to be able to generate revenues very quickly, because I'm not sure how defensible some of those revenues are. Well, let's see what happens. And the third, so the first is data, the second is AI talent, and the third is leadership. If you get seduced by the hype, if you place the wrong bets, then you're not going to survive as an organization. So that goes back to my first point, which is surround yourself with advisors, people that really do know what they're doing, so that you can make sure that you place the right bets. I can't remember if I answered your question there.
So, before we open up to questions, you mentioned machine consciousness, and I think it would be really interesting if you could just talk a little bit about the work you're doing with Conscium, and the reassurance that should give us in a world where people are worried or otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel about how we can keep control of this as the future?
Yeah. So I'd like to think that I've been quite good at sort of predicting how technology is progressing. I've never really capitalized on it. Back in the day when I was modeling bumblebee brains, I recognized that the bottleneck in being able to build big brains was compute, essentially. And so I took an approach to try and look for algorithms to try to optimize the training of brains. What Jeff Hinton was doing was parallelizing on GPUs, and I should have known at the time to buy NVIDIA 22 years ago. And anyway, so I guess I do think there's some interesting things that are going to happen over the next several years. And rather than just waiting for it to happen, which I historically have done, I wanted to lean into it. And I think there's a few interesting problems. One is, at the moment, 67% of the population currently believe that large language models are conscious. So people are building relationships with them, they're falling in love with them. This is happening, right? Some of them are actually healthy relationships. I know people are using for therapy and actually helping them, but some of them are not so healthy relationships. And we need to help people understand how to navigate how these relationships are going to work with AIs. Because I don't believe that they are conscious. And I'm publishing a book in a few months on perspectives on machine consciousness. Happy to talk about consciousness if you want, but there is a dotted line to actually building machines that are conscious and using these neuromorphic approaches. And I think that there's a concept called mind crime, which is we could potentially build machines that can suffer, feel pain, et cetera, and not realize it. And so we potentially have a duty of care, not just to protecting the well-being of human beings and animals, but we now have a duty of care to protecting AIs. But that's not the core mission of Conscium. The core mission of so I thought we had 40 years before we built a superintelligence. I thought we had 40 years to sort ourselves out as a species, to reduce the cost of goods by removing friction, making goods more abundant, food, healthcare, energy, transport, etc. And over the next 40 years, we'll gradually free people from jobs, but they'll actually have the resources they need to survive and thrive as a human being, the food, etc. Because we've managed to reduce the cost so much. I don't think we've now got 40 years before we build a superintelligence. I think we've probably got less than 5 years. And instead of waiting for humans to sort themselves out, the hypothesis is that would a conscious superintelligence be safer for humanity than a zombie superintelligence? At the moment, we are building towards a zombie superintelligence. So these large language models are zombies, and they will be hell-bent on achieving their goal despite not understanding the impact it will have on suffering. And so the question is, can you build a machine that is conscious, that understands suffering, pain, love, that can empathize, and the hope is that it will help navigate us through some of the challenges that we are facing over the next decade. And but there's two very interesting commercial offshoots from that I won't bore you with, but one is platformizing these neuromorphics, and the other one is testing agents. So you will be, and the organizations you're working with will be deploying an army of intoxicated graduates across your organization, and forgive the technical term, but it will be a show. And so the point is that there's going to be much more emphasis on AI governance and testing, making sure that these agents actually have the capability of doing their job. So rather than waiting for that to happen, Consume is providing that as a service, not just testing for knowledge and skills, etc., but eventually testing for consciousness. There's a very good definition of AI, which comes from a definition of intelligence. No, bear with me, because if you ask people what's consciousness, they will convolute and confuse intelligence and consciousness, and they'll also confuse it with human level intelligence and consciousness. There's confusion. So let me just separate consciousness and intelligence. So there's a very good definition of intelligence, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. Now, most people's definition, which I think is the weakest definition, is getting computers to do things that humans can do. It's a popular definition because ChatGPT can do things that humans can do. It's a terrible definition. There's a definition from the 80s, which is building systems that can adapt themselves. And most systems, by the way, don't adapt themselves. So arguably nobody's doing AI, which is of course ridiculous because everybody's doing AI. So if you ask people what is consciousness, they'll say things like, it's my inner voice. And by the way, there's a thing called anandaphasia. I don't actually have an inner voice, so my head is empty. It's like complete. I don't have any chattering voice in my head. Anyway, that's a different conversation. So if you ask people what is intelligence, they'll say things like planning, being able to take this light and make some sort of kind of model of the world, be able to feel. And if you map that to that definition of intelligence, then what you've got is things that are predicting the world, and then things that are getting feedback from whether that prediction was good or bad. And if you imagine each one of those features like a segment on a color wheel, imagine you then spin the color wheel. What happens if you have all of those colors? Then white emerges. And there's a concept in consciousness theory called illusionism. Not that consciousness isn't real, but it's an emergent property of the interaction of all of these things that allow us to make predictions and learn whether those predictions are good or bad in motion. And when you stop the color wheel and try to find consciousness in the brain or whatever, it disappears. And what I'm interested in, I'm going to sound massively arrogant here, but I think I've got my head around consciousness now. What I'm interested in is what do you need, what size segments do you need, and what types of segments do you need, and in what motion for a system to suffer or feel pain. That's for me is the key question. Hopefully it's happier, and it's aligned with the value system or value system. And because at the moment what's happening is we're training AIs on the corpus of the internet, which is not necessarily the best representation of humanity. And then we're putting guardrails, playing whack-a-mole to stop it from misbehaving, which is a dumb thing to do because they'll always find ways around these guardrails. So the question is, can you build an AI that has innate values? So if I go back to my master's project, I created I created the fish tank, which I had agents that are interacting with each other. I can create a game where you have to fight, lie, cheat, and kill each other to survive. Or I can create a fish tank a game where you have to be altruistic, sacrificial, cooperative to survive. You can evolve AIs in a way that embed values, and that's the goal. World, and then things that are getting feedback.